Sometimes the truth arrives with 4 paws, when every human being has already stopped looking for it. The clock on the wall showed less
Morning,
than
Mason.
1 hour.
Ready for the day?
Remaining when Mason
Almost.
Hale slowly
Just
stood
checking the
from
schedule.
the narrow bed inside his cell. At 68 years old, the
Team,
former Army
we're heading
veteran
north now. I
looked
want
far
flankers
older
out another
than the
20 meters.
photographs that
Stay
still
sharp and
appeared
report
in old
anything
newspaper
unusual.
archives. His gray hair was thinner now.
Good dog, Gunner.
His shoulders slightly bent, but his eyes remained steady.
Well done, buddy.
Outside
That was
the
perfect.
reinforced door, footsteps echoed through the quiet hallway. For years, Mason had listened to those sounds while the world moved on without him. Reporters had forgotten him. Politicians
Look at this
had
stamp on the
forgotten him.
back.
Even
That's
most of
Alan
the people
Mercer's
who once called him
authorization.
a friend had disappeared. A correctional
We
officer
finally
stopped
have
at the
proof.
door and spoke softly. Mr. Hale, they're ready to hear your
Oh,
final
Gunner, I
request.
knew I'd see you
Mason
again.
nodded and took a slow
I missed
breath.
you so
He had
much,
spent
boy.
countless nights thinking about this moment, yet his answer had never changed. I want to see Gunner, he said. The officer blinked. Your old police dog. Mason smiled for the first time that day. He's not just a police dog, he's my partner. Hours earlier, television crews had gathered outside the prison gates, expecting another routine news story. But when word spread that a condemned veteran had requested a reunion with his retired German Shepherd, something unexpected happened. This shook attention. Viewers across the country shared old photographs of Mason and Gunner during their years of service. Some remembered seeing them on local news after successful rescues. Others recalled stories of the pair helping find missing children during storms and disasters. The public suddenly remembered the man they had once called a hero. Inside the prison, Mason sat quietly while memories returned one by one. He remembered Gunner as a young dog, energetic and fearless. He remembered long nights, difficult searches, and countless miles traveled together. Through every challenge, Gunner had remained at his side. Even when the rest of the world eventually turned away, Mason never stopped believing that somewhere, somehow, the dog still remembered him too. A few minutes later, another officer entered carrying paperwork. The visit has been approved, she said. The dog is on his way. Mason lowered his head and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, emotion threatened to break through the calm expression he had carefully maintained. Thank you, he whispered. Across the prison complex, several staff members watched security monitors while discussing the unusual request. Most expected a quiet reunion, nothing more. Yet one older guard shook his head. You ever work around K9s? He asked. Those dogs notice things people miss. Nobody paid much attention to his comment. Meanwhile, beyond the prison walls, a vehicle carrying an aging German Shepherd rolled through the front gate. Gunner's muzzle had turned white with age, but his eyes remained alert. As the vehicle stopped, the dog suddenly lifted his head and stared toward the main building. Then he let out a low sound unlike anything his handler had heard all day, and for reasons nobody could explain, every person nearby felt that something unexpected was about to happen. 25 years earlier, Mason Hale was known throughout the county as the veteran who could find anyone, anywhere. On a bright spring morning, he stepped out of his patrol truck and looked down at the young German Shepherd sitting beside him. Ready to work, partner? Mason asked. Gunner immediately wagged his tail and barked once. Deputy Sarah Collins laughed from across the parking lot. I still think he understands every word you say. Mason grinned. That is because he does. The small crowd gathered near the command center chuckled, but nobody questioned the results. Whenever Mason and Gunner were assigned to a search, people felt hope. Later that afternoon, a worried father approached the team. His teenage son had wandered away during a hiking trip and had not returned. The man looked exhausted. Please tell me you can find him. Mason knelt beside Gunner and accepted a jacket that belonged to the missing teenager. He let the dog smell it carefully. We are going to do everything we can, Mason said. Right, Gunner? The German Shepherd stood instantly and focused on the trail ahead. 4 hours later, after crossing creeks, hills, and thick patches of forest, Gunner suddenly accelerated. Mason followed closely. Within minutes, they found the teenager sitting safely beneath a large oak tree. The father broke into tears when he saw his son. Thank you, he repeated over and over. Reporters arrived before sunset. One of them held a microphone toward Mason. How do you keep finding people when others cannot? Mason looked at Gunner. I do not. He does. The next morning, local newspapers featured photographs of the pair. Children recognized Gunner at community events. Veterans shook Mason's hand. Life seemed simple then. One evening, while driving back from another successful search, Sarah glanced over from the passenger seat. "You ever think about retiring?" she asked. Mason laughed. "And do what?" "Fishing, relaxing, sleeping past 5 in the morning." Mason reached over and scratched Gunner behind the ears. "This guy would never allow it." Sarah smiled. "Fair point." For years, everything continued that way. Mason and Gunner became one of the most respected K-9 teams in the state. They helped during storms, searches, and emergencies. Their names appeared in articles celebrating community service. But success also brought attention from powerful people. One autumn afternoon, Mason received a call requesting assistance at a private event hosted by a wealthy businessman named Richard Voss. The event was attracting local officials, business leaders, and members of the media. Sarah glanced at the assignment sheet. Fancy crowd. Mason shrugged. A job is a job. Yet when they arrived, Gunner behaved strangely. The dog remained calm, but his eyes locked onto one particular man standing near Richard Voss. A tall official wearing an expensive watch. Gunner stared so intensely that Mason noticed immediately. "What is it, buddy?" he asked quietly. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He simply kept watching the man. Sarah followed his gaze. "You know him?" Mason shook his head. "Never seen him before." The official turned briefly and made eye contact with Mason. Then he smiled and walked away. At the time, Mason thought nothing of it. Years later, sitting alone in a prison cell, he would remember that exact moment and wish he had paid closer attention. 3 months after the charity event, Mason was finishing paperwork at the K-9 unit when Sarah walked into his office, carrying a folder. "You have been requested again," she said. Mason looked up. "By who?" "Richard Voss." Mason frowned slightly. "The businessman from the fundraiser?" Sarah nodded. "Apparently he trusts you." Mason glanced at Gunner resting beside the desk. "That makes one of us." The assignment seemed routine. Voss had received anonymous threats and wanted additional security assessments for several public appearances. For weeks, Mason and Gunner worked around crowded events, conference centers, and community gatherings. Nothing unusual happened. Then, one rainy evening, everything changed. Mason was driving home when his phone rang. It was dispatch. "Officer Hale, we need you downtown immediately." "What happened?" Mason asked. The voice on the other end hesitated. "Richard Voss has been found dead." Mason tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I am on my way." The scene was already crowded when he arrived. Detectives moved quickly between vehicles while reporters gathered behind barriers. Sarah approached him with a worried expression. "This is bad. What do we know?" Mason asked. "Not much yet." Gunner stepped from the truck and immediately began scanning the area. Several investigators nodded respectfully as Mason passed. At first, everything felt normal. Then he noticed something strange. The tall official from the fundraiser was standing nearby, speaking with senior investigators. The same man Gunner had stared at months earlier. Their eyes met briefly before the official looked away. "Who is that guy, Mason?" asked Sarah. "Deputy Commissioner Alan Mercer," she replied. "Big name, powerful connections." Mason looked at Gunner. The dog was watching Mercer again. "Interesting," Mason muttered. Over the next few days, the investigation dominated local news. Every station covered the story. Every newspaper demanded answers. Then the impossible happened. Detectives arrived at Mason's house with a warrant. Sarah could barely believe what she was hearing. "There has to be a mistake." Mason stood frozen. "What are you talking about?" One detective avoided eye contact. "Evidence has linked you to the case. That is impossible." "We are simply following the facts." Mason felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. The accusations spread quickly. Former supporters stopped calling, neighbors stopped waving. Reporters camped outside his property. One evening, Sarah visited his house. "Tell me the truth," she said quietly. Mason looked directly at her. "I did not do this." Sarah studied his face for several seconds. "Then why does everything point at you?" Mason had no answer. That question haunted him every night. Weeks later, additional evidence appeared, then more. Each discovery seemed worse than the last. Television commentators began speaking as though the case was already solved. During one hearing, Mason watched strangers shake their heads before he even entered the room. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. "Did you betray the public trust? Why would a decorated veteran do this? Mason remained silent. Back in his vehicle, he sat beside Gunnar and placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. "They already decided who I am," he whispered. Gunnar looked up at him and rested his head against Mason's arm. It was the only comfort Mason had left, and neither of them realized that far away, someone was quietly smiling because the trap had worked exactly as planned. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Every week seemed to bring another piece of evidence, another witness, another headline. Mason sat quietly at the defense table while reporters filled the courtroom. Sometimes he felt as if he were watching someone else's life collapse. His attorney, Daniel Brooks, leaned closer during a recess. "I am not giving up," he said. "There are still things that do not make sense." Mason nodded. "Then why does every new piece of evidence point at me?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Finally, he sighed. "That is exactly what worries me." Outside the courthouse, public opinion had already shifted. People who once praised Mason now questioned everything about him. Television commentators discussed his military background, his police career, and every decision he had ever made. Sarah Collins refused to join the crowd. One evening, she visited the K-9 training center, where Gunnar was temporarily being housed during the legal proceedings. As soon as she entered, the German Shepherd walked toward her. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "I wish you could tell me what really happened." Gunnar wagged his tail, but then suddenly turned toward a storage cabinet containing several boxes of case materials. His ears lifted, his body became alert. Sarah frowned. "What is it?" The dog stepped closer to the cabinet and sniffed repeatedly. One of the trainers noticed. "He does that every time those evidence boxes come in." "Every time?" Sarah asked, without fail. Sarah opened the cabinet and watched Gunnar carefully. The dog ignored most of the boxes. Then he focused on one particular file package connected to the Voss investigation. He sniffed intensely before backing away and sitting down. "That is strange," Sarah whispered. Later that night, she called Daniel. "I know this sounds crazy. Try me," Daniel replied. "Gunnar keeps reacting to certain evidence from the case." There was silence on the line. "A dog reaction is not enough to help us in court," Daniel said. "I know, but Gunnar never acts without a reason." Meanwhile, the prosecution continued building what appeared to be an airtight case. Jurors listened to testimony. Experts presented reports. Witnesses spoke confidently. With every passing day, Mason felt the walls closing in. During one hearing, he noticed Alan Mercer sitting quietly in the gallery. The deputy commissioner appeared calm, almost detached. Their eyes met briefly. Mercer offered a polite nod. Something about that moment unsettled Mason. After court adjourned, Mason spoke to Daniel. "Do you know Mercer well?" Daniel looked surprised. "Not really. Why? I cannot explain it." Mason glanced toward the hallway where Mercer had disappeared. "Every time I see him, I feel like I am missing something important." Months later, the verdict arrived. The courtroom became completely silent as the decision was read. Mason closed his eyes for several seconds. Sarah lowered her head. Daniel stared at the table in disbelief. Across the room, Mercer remained expressionless. As officers escorted Mason away, he turned toward Sarah one final time. "Take care of Gunnar," he said. Her eyes filled with tears. "I will." Mason forced a small smile. "He is smarter than all of us anyway." Sarah managed a weak laugh. But as Mason disappeared through the courtroom doors, neither of them realized that Gunnar was about to remember something that everyone else had overlooked for years. Years passed. The appeals came and went. New attorneys reviewed the case, filed motions, and searched for mistakes, but nothing changed. Mason grew older inside prison walls, while the outside world slowly forgot his name. Yet Gunnar never forgot. After retiring from active service, the aging German Shepherd lived with Sarah on a small property outside town. Every morning, he followed the same routine. Every afternoon, he rested near the porch. But whenever Sarah brought out old boxes connected to Mason's case, something changed. One rainy evening, nearly 20 years after the conviction, Sarah sat in her living room, sorting through documents she had never been able to throw away. Gunnar was sleeping nearby until she opened a storage box containing photographs, reports, and evidence summaries. Immediately, the dog stood up. "You noticed that again, did you?" Sarah asked. Gunnar approached the coffee table and began sniffing several items. Most received little attention. Then he stopped at a photograph. His ears rose. His body became rigid. Sarah picked it up. The image showed several officials standing together at a public event years earlier. Richard Voss was there. So was Alan Mercer. "What is it?" she whispered. Gunnar continued staring at the picture. Sarah felt a chill. The next day she visited Daniel Brooks, who was now nearing retirement himself. He listened patiently while she explained what had happened. "You drove an hour because a dog stared at a photograph?" Daniel asked with a tired smile. "This is Gunnar." Sarah placed the picture on his desk. "You remember how accurate he always was." Daniel studied the image. Mercer again. "Exactly." Daniel leaned back. "I never understood why Mercer appeared around this case so often." Sarah pointed toward the photograph. "Look at his watch." Daniel frowned. "What about it? Do you remember what Mason said years ago?" "He told me Gunnar acted strangely around Mercer at that fundraiser." Daniel adjusted his glasses and looked closer. "That does not prove anything." "I know," Sarah sighed, "but I cannot shake the feeling that we missed something." Later that week, a young investigative journalist named Emily Carter contacted Daniel after seeing an old documentary about the case. "I think there are unanswered questions," she said during a phone call. Daniel laughed softly. "You are about 20 years late, maybe," Emily replied. "But sometimes old stories hide the biggest secrets." Curious, Daniel agreed to meet her. When Emily arrived, Sarah brought Gunnar along. The journalist immediately knelt to greet the old dog. "So this is the famous partner." Gunnar wagged his tail politely before turning toward the stack of case files on the conference table. Emily watched carefully. "He keeps doing that?" "Every time," Sarah answered. Emily looked from the dog to the files. Then she looked at the photograph containing Alan Mercer. "Maybe we should stop asking why the dog remembers," she said quietly. "Maybe we should start asking what he remembers." Across town, in a large office overlooking the city skylines, Alan Mercer received a phone call informing him that a reporter had started asking questions about the old Voss investigation. For the first time in many years, the powerful official did not look completely comfortable. Emily Carter moved faster than anyone expected. Within days, she had requested archived records, interviewed retired officers, and tracked down people connected to the investigation. Most refused to talk. A few ended interviews the moment Alan Mercer's name appeared. That alone caught her attention. One afternoon, she spread dozens of documents across a conference table, while Daniel and Sarah watched. "Look at this," Emily said. "Mercer appears in internal communications connected to the investigation far more often than his position required." Daniel adjusted his glasses. "That could mean nothing. Or it could mean everything," Emily replied. Sarah sat quietly while Gunnar rested beside her chair. The old German shepherd appeared tired, but when Emily placed a photograph of Mercer on the table, the dog's head immediately lifted. "There it is again," Sarah whispered. Emily stared at Gunnar. "He is reacting before we even say the name." Daniel folded his arms. "A reaction is not evidence." "No," Emily agreed, "but it might tell us where to look." Over the following week, Emily uncovered something unusual. Several original evidence logs from the Voss investigation missing. Not misplaced. Missing. Entire entries had vanished from the archive system. When she informed Daniel, he looked genuinely alarmed. "Evidence records do not simply disappear." "That is what I thought," Emily said. "Someone removed them." Meanwhile, inside the prison, Mason sat across from his attorney during a scheduled visit. Years had passed since he had expected good news. "You look different," Mason said. Daniel smiled faintly. "Older. You always looked old." For the first time in months, both men laughed. Then Daniel became serious. "Someone is reviewing the case again." Mason stared at him. "Another appeal?" "Not exactly." "Then what?" Daniel hesitated. "A journalist found irregularities." Mason leaned back slowly. "After all these years?" "I know." Mason looked toward the small window. "Do not do this unless you truly believe something is there." "I do." Mason remained silent for several seconds. "And Gunnar," Daniel smiled. "Still causing trouble." A genuine smile crossed Mason's face. "Good." Back outside, Emily received an anonymous email containing only a few words. "Stop digging into the Voss case." The message had no signature, no identifying information. She showed it to Sarah. "That means somebody is nervous," Sarah said. "That is exactly what I was thinking." 2 days later, Emily finally located a retired records technician who had worked during the original investigation. At first, the woman refused to speak. Then Emily mentioned missing files. The technician's expression changed immediately. "I knew something was wrong," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" Emily asked. The woman glanced around the empty diner before lowering her voice. A senior official ordered certain materials removed before trial. Emily felt her pulse quicken. "Who?" The technician swallowed hard. "I never saw the paperwork." "But—" The woman looked directly at her. The order came from Mercer's office. That evening, Emily rushed to meet Daniel and Sarah. As she entered the room, Gunnar stood up before she said a single word. "I found something," she announced. Nobody noticed that far across town, Alan Mercer was already receiving updates about every move they made. The room fell silent after Emily revealed what the retired records technician had told her. Daniel slowly removed his glasses. "Are you absolutely sure?" Emily nodded. She was terrified, but she was clear. The missing materials were removed after instructions came from Mercer's office. Sarah looked down at Gunnar. The old German shepherd remained focused on the photograph lying on the table. All these years, she whispered. "All these years we were looking in the wrong direction." Daniel stood and began pacing. "This is still not enough. Suspicion is not proof." "I know," Emily replied, "but I found something else." She opened a folder and spread several documents across the table. "These are visitor logs from the weeks before the trial." Daniel leaned closer. "What am I looking at?" Emily pointed to several entries. "Mercer met privately with members of the investigative team multiple times." Sarah frowned. "Was that unusual?" "Very," Emily answered. "His role did not require direct involvement." Daniel studied the dates carefully, then his expression changed. "Wait, what?" Emily asked. Daniel pointed to one entry. "This meeting happened the day before the final evidence package was submitted." Nobody spoke for several seconds. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The following morning, Emily tracked down another former employee connected to the case. A retired evidence supervisor named Frank Dalton agreed to meet at a small diner outside town. He appeared nervous from the moment he sat down. "I do not want trouble," Frank said quietly. "I am retired. I have grandchildren." Emily nodded. "I understand. I just need the truth." Frank stared into his coffee cup. Back then, nobody questioned Mercer. "Why?" Emily asked. "Because careers disappeared when people crossed him." Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Did you ever see anything unusual?" Frank hesitated. "I saw evidence arrive, and I saw different evidence leave." Emily's heart began racing. "Different how?" Frank lowered his voice. "Some items did not match the originals I logged." Daniel leaned forward. "Are you saying evidence was altered?" Frank looked around the diner before answering. "I am saying something happened that should never happen in an honest investigation." That afternoon, Emily returned to her office and reviewed every document she had collected. One detail suddenly caught her attention. She immediately called Sarah. "Bring Gunnar." "Right now," Sarah asked. "Right now." An hour later, they met inside a records archive. Emily laid several enlarged photographs on a table. "Watch him." Gunnar slowly approached. He sniffed one image, then another. Finally, he stopped at a photograph taken near the original crime scene. His ears lifted instantly. "That one," Sarah whispered. Emily examined the image carefully. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then her eyes widened. Standing in the background, partially hidden behind a vehicle, was Alan Mercer. "That photograph was never introduced at trial," Daniel said. "Because nobody noticed him." Emily shook her head. "No, somebody noticed him." She looked down at Gunnar. "We just ignored the witness." At that exact moment, hundreds of miles away, Mason sat alone inside his cell, waiting for news he no longer expected to receive, completely unaware that the first real crack in the case against him had finally appeared. The discovery of the forgotten photograph changed everything. Within 48 hours, Emily's story was published by multiple news outlets. Questions that had remained buried for decades suddenly exploded across television's screens and social media. Reporters wanted answers. Former investigators were contacted. Public pressure began building faster than anyone expected. Daniel arrived at the prison carrying more documents than he had brought in years. Mason immediately noticed the difference in his face. "Something happened," Mason said. Daniel sat down and smiled. "For the first time in a very long time, I think we are getting close." Mason stared at him. Close to what? The truth. Back in the city, Emily continued digging. One source led to another. One document led to a second hidden archive. Then she found the breakthrough. It was an internal memorandum that had never been presented during the original proceedings. The document revealed that investigators had received information pointing toward financial corruption, involving Richard Voss and several public officials. The lead had been closed without explanation. Emily immediately called Daniel. "You need to see this." Less than an hour later, Daniel and Sarah were studying the document together. "This changes the entire motive," Daniel said quietly. Sarah nodded, and it explains why certain people wanted the investigation controlled. At that moment, Gunnar, lying beneath the table, slowly stood up. His aging body moved more carefully than before, but his attention was fixed on another file that Emily had just removed from a box. "What now?" Sarah asked. Emily handed the folder to Daniel. Inside was a transcript from an old interview that had never been introduced at trial. A witness had reported seeing a senior official near the scene shortly before the crime occurred. The official's name had been redacted. Daniel looked up. "This was hidden." "Exactly," Emily replied. "And somebody made sure nobody ever followed up." The pressure finally reached Alan Mercer. During a televised interview, a reporter asked a direct question. "Deputy Commissioner Mercer, why does your name continue appearing in newly discovered records connected to the Hale case?" For the first time, viewers noticed hesitation. Mercer answered carefully, "I performed administrative duties, nothing more." But the response only fueled more suspicion. Behind closed doors, investigators reopened portions of the original case. Retired employees were interviewed again. Archived materials were re-examined. One by one, old assumptions began collapsing. Several days later, Daniel received an urgent call from a state review board. "We need you here immediately," the voice said. "We found something." When Daniel arrived, officials showed him a recovered chain of custody report that had been missing for years. The report directly contradicted critical evidence used against Mason. Daniel stared at the page in disbelief. This alone could have changed the entire trial. "We know," one official replied. Late that evening, Daniel returned to the prison. Mason looked up as he entered. "Good news or bad news?" Daniel placed the document on the table between them. "The kind of news I have been waiting 20 years to bring you." Mason read silently. Then he looked up. His hands trembled slightly. "Is this real?" "It is." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Mason whispered, "And Gunnar?" Daniel smiled. "Your partner may have just helped solve the case everyone else gave up on." Outside, storm clouds rolled across the night sky while emergency hearings were being scheduled. For the first time in decades, powerful people were being forced to answer difficult questions, and somewhere in the darkness, Alan Mercer realized the walls were finally beginning to close around him. The emergency hearing began before sunrise. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps while cameras broadcast live updates across the country. Inside a small waiting room, Mason sat quietly beside Daniel. For the first time in many years, the former veteran looked nervous. "I used to think I would never walk out of this," Mason said softly. Daniel smiled. "Today is different. Do not celebrate yet. After everything we found, I am allowing myself a little hope." Several hours later, the review board examined the newly recovered records, the missing chain of custody documents, the concealed witness statements, and the evidence that had never been disclosed. One official finally leaned forward and spoke words Mason had waited decades to hear. "The integrity of the original conviction has been fundamentally compromised." The room became silent. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Mason simply stared ahead. Outside, Sarah stood with Gunnar near a shaded area beside the courthouse. The old German shepherd was slower now, but he remained alert. "Hang in there, buddy," Sarah whispered. "Your partner is almost home." Shortly after noon, the decision arrived. Mason Hale was officially cleared of the conviction that had stolen so much of his life. The rulings spread through the courthouse within seconds. Reporters rushed to break the news. Staff members exchanged stunned looks. Daniel turned toward Mason with tears in his eyes. "You are free." Mason did not move at first. "Say it again." Daniel laughed through the emotion. "You are free, Mason." For several seconds, the veteran could not speak. Then he slowly stood and shook Daniel's hand before pulling him into a hug. Thank you. You never stopped fighting. Neither did you. As Mason exited the courthouse, sunlight flooded the front steps. A crowd had gathered outside. Some people applauded. Others simply watched in silence. Then Mason saw Gunnar. The German Shepherd was standing only a few yards away. For a moment, neither moved. Then Gunnar began walking forward. Mason dropped to one knee. "Hey, partner." The old dog reached him and gently pressed his head against Mason's chest. Mason wrapped both arms around him. Years of pain, loneliness, and injustice seemed to disappear in that single moment. Many people in the crowd wiped away tears. Sarah smiled. "I think he missed you." Mason laughed. "Only a little." Emily Carter approached with a microphone, but stopped when she saw the reunion. "You earned this moment," she said. "The story can wait." Mason nodded gratefully. Weeks later, further investigations revealed widespread misconduct surrounding the original case. Careers ended. Hidden actions were exposed. The truth finally reached the public. Yet, Mason rarely spoke about those details. When reporters asked what mattered most, his answer never changed. "People saved me," he said, but a dog reminded them where to look. Several months later, Mason and Gunnar spent their days on a quiet property outside town. Some mornings they sat together watching the sunrise. Some afternoons they walked slowly along a fence line. One evening, Sarah visited and found Mason smiling at the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Mason looked down at Gunnar resting beside his chair. "I spent years believing everything was lost." He gently scratched behind the dog's ears. "Turns out my best friend never stopped searching for the truth." Gunnar lifted his head and looked at him. Mason smiled. "Good job, partner." And for the first time in decades, both of them were exactly where they belonged. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with friends who might enjoy it too. We would love to know where you are watching from. Tell us your city and country in the comments. More heartfelt and unforgettable hero dog stories are already waiting for you. See you in the next one.